All right, so this is the Momentum hand grinder, and this review was a little bit of a rabbit hole for me. It is a dual burr hand grinder, and I'll be straight, I was a little bit skeptical about this concept when I first heard about it. The question I kept coming back to was, why bother? It's more complexity, more parts, extra stuff to keep track of, a little more cost, a lot more cost, and for what? Like, it is still just going to grind your coffee, right? Well, the answer is yes and no. Now, there are some people that I'm actually going to try and steer you away from this hand grinder, and there are others of you who are about to get sucked down a rabbit hole with this thing, just like I did. The person who runs Momentum is a guy named Mickey, and he sent me this grinder to check out. It comes in a really nice box, looks super premium. The fit and finish is really good. It all feels super smooth. It's machined with tight tolerances. Everything feels tight about it. So as far as first impressions go, it was good. It comes with a couple different knobs, which are press fit. You just kind of press them on, as well as different tops for the handle cover here. You get one clear one metal one. I kind of like the metal one. It also comes with several sieve screens, so we're going to get into these in a bit, as well as this thing, which is called dechafer, however you want to say that, which is designed to separate the chaff from your final grind. And then the main attraction with this grinder is the two burrs, and it's got one of them right about here and another one right in here. And why that could potentially be advantageous is a little bit complicated, but I'm going to try and explain it to you. It all comes down to something called particle size distribution. Basically, it refers to how close are all the grind particles in size to one another. Are they all the same size, or do they have a lot of variance? You get a lot of really tiny particles and some bigger ones. The little ones are called fines, the big ones are called boulders. And by going between those two poles, you get really different results in terms of your final cup and taste. Now, in barista competitions, for example, you would see people trying to get higher particle size uniformity or grind size consistency by grinding their coffee twice. They would grind it once, and then they would put it through another grinder and then grind it again. You wouldn't think that that would make a difference, but it does. Overall, it stages the grinding process, which makes for generally a more even flavor. And you have all of that going on in one grinder with Momentum. It's interesting, but you have to ask yourself, is it worth it? There are a lot of other really great hand grinders, but their flavor profile kind of just is what it is. They taste a certain way, and you can go coarser or finer to adjust it a little bit, but on the whole, they're going to have kind of a consistent profile. This grinder, on the other hand, you can actually mess with the actual taste profile, and how drastic that difference actually can be really caught me off guard. But before we get into that, let's just take a sec and let's look at how this whole thing is put together. First off, you have a handle up here which comes on and off, and you can actually adjust the length of this handle, which is pretty crazy from a comfort standpoint. So if you want to have an easier turn but a wider turn, you can adjust that. Or if you want to have a harder but a tighter, you can do that as well. The catch cup comes off of the bottom. And one thing that I noticed about this catch cup is it is about the same size as a 58 millimeter portafilter. And because it's magnetic, you can just flip it over. It's kind of fun to use. Also, on the bottom of this, there is a magnetic attachment, comes off just like that, and you can actually cap this and use this as a shaker to kind of further homogenize your grind. You can unscrew the bottom of the catch cup off, and that's actually where you put one of these three fines filters if you want to use them. They come in 400, 600, and 800 micron size. We'll talk more about sifting in a bit. If you don't want to use them, they include this little metal O-ring which fills the gap to make sure no grounds kind of collect. And then you have the two burr sections. The bottom one is housed right in here, and the top one is housed right in the top here. Now I'm going to take the bottom burr out. It comes out with an Allen wrench. Now my Momentum did not include an Allen wrench. I think they come with them now. You can unscrew the little bolt, and then the rest will kind of fall out into your hand just like that. Now, this burr is their Gen 2 burr. It is not coated because it was an early prototype. They come like this now, coated with a titanium coating. One thing that you'll notice is these washers have a tendency to just like fall out. It can be complicated to know how to put them in the right way. A good rule of thumb is if there's a ridge on your washer, put that towards the bearing that's inside. Then the carrier, which has the outer burr, comes off as well. And then you're left with just the upper housing with that upper burr. The upper burr is attached with a wing nut. It'll slide out. You can see this burr is titanium coated as well. And then you can actually just pull the axle right out and you'll see another washer and a spring. Now in each one of these two sections that houses a burr, there are two bearings, and that's to hold the burrs in a good alignment. And that's a pretty smart design because there is a joint right here, and you can see there's a little bit of play in that joint where this axle runs from the top burr to the bottom burr. The nice thing is because of the bearing setup, it's going to hold each of the burrs in a good alignment regardless of that attachment. So I didn't have any issues with this grinder becoming poorly aligned because of its design. It's robust, feels tight, it's good. All right, I'm gonna do some movie magic and we're gonna put this all back together. One thing I picked up on from a friend of mine, Aaron, I'll link to him in the description, is when you're tightening this upper burr back on, don't leave it all the way tight. Tighten it and then back it off by 2 clicks just to avoid damaging the burr. Okay, so as far as adjusting the grinder, you have the adjustment point for the top burr right here and the lower burr right here. The dechafer, if you want to use it, goes in here just like this. It's magnetic. And the fine sifters go in the bottom like I showed you. Now, by this point, your head might be spinning with all the different options and settings that there are on what is normally a very simple hand grinder with one setting. And if you're starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed, let me just give you the freedom and say there are a lot of really great and much simpler and much cheaper hand grinders on the market. If the more I tell you, you're leaning in and wondering how all the puzzle pieces fit together, buckle up because this could get a little crazy. Just these two grinding settings in relationship to one another, I could get very different tastes, not only out of the same coffee, even out of the same brew recipe and brew timing. Now for filter, I got this grinder, got out of the box, got good results, didn't go too crazy, used their suggested settings, went a little finer, and I was finding it was a little bit warmer than some high clarity grinders that I would use. Definitely elevated the sweetness in the cup. Not as high clarity for sure as a Pietro Pro Brew or like an SSPMP, that kind of thing, but still good presentation of the acidity with some sweetness and a very well-rounded cup. Then I started trying to do espresso, and at first I really struggled. The step size for the lower burr is 18 microns, which you hear that, and if you're an espresso person, you know that's a big step distance, and that can make it very difficult to dial in your coffee. Now it's a conical burr, so it's not going to translate exactly into burr gap, but it's still a big gap, and I was getting differences in shot time from one step to the next, anywhere from like 6-7 seconds to like 10-11 seconds. That is a pretty painful dial in. Then I started messing with the top burr. I opened it all the way up so that the grinds are going through super coarse and the bottom burr is doing the majority of the work. I left the bottom burr at the same size, and to my surprise, the shot pulled differently. I didn't think it would. It flowed a little bit slower. It had higher body, a little bit more sweetness, a little bit more complexity. I thought, okay, this is getting interesting. Same grind size on the bottom burr anyway, different result. So then I went the other way and I tightened down the top burr so that it's doing a lot more work and it's starting to grind a lot closer to an espresso grind, and the bottom burr is really just finishing things up. And this shot, even though the bottom burr grind size was the same as the previous two, it flowed way faster, almost like a turbo. And I actually had to tighten up the bottom burr by 2 to 3 steps, depending on the coffee, to approach a similar shot timing and profile. So I'm sitting there with these two shots, one with the top burr opened all the way and the other with it closed more and the bottom burr tightened up a little bit. They pulled exactly the same timing. One of them has a much more present acidity, very clear, lighter body, very nice cup of espresso. This one, with the bottom burr doing most of the work, is something much closer to a traditional espresso shot. High body, thick, sweet, syrupy, not as much definition in the acidity. It's the same coffee, and they even pulled to the same time. I don't know of any other grinder that can give me that result. Here's what's happening, in my opinion, from a technical standpoint. Typically, when you're talking about espresso, something that you want to pay attention to is the percent of fines in your puck. And that is how much of the puck consists of those little tiny particles. And that can make for a denser puck and a slower flow, more traditional shots, all of that type of thing. A lower percentage of fines will give you faster flow, higher clarity, more modern style. This grinder really bridges those two worlds. When the bottom burr is doing most of the work, it's going to create more fines, at least in my experience, and create that more traditional style espresso shot. When you balance out the workload between the two burrs or shift more workload to the top burr, it's going to create a more even grind size distribution with less fines and a more modern style espresso shot. It's pretty crazy. And then I went back and started messing around with my filter brews. You can create similar effects on filter brew as well. Then you get into adding these things, these sieves. Now, there are issues with sieving, doing it consistently, the way it works, all that. If you're a crazy nut, you have probably already come across some of this stuff. But you can sieve out some of your fines and then add them into your pour over brew halfway through. That's one of their recommendations. They also recommend reverse grinding, which that absolutely sounded so nonsensical to me, but it does give, again, a different result. And so you just have all of these possibilities of ways to tune your brew that are just not accessible on other pieces of equipment. Now, does that make it like a unicorn grinder? Like I get 10 grinders in one and there's absolutely nothing bad with it? No, absolutely not. It does have its faults too. First, obviously, is the price. It's crazy expensive. I don't know about you, but I don't know a lot of people who are itching at the chance to drop $500 US on a hand grinder. And for those that are, they are often looking for a super high clarity cup profile, which this is not quite going to get you there compared to other grinders that will at the same or lower price. Now, it definitely has a range of clarity to complexity, which is more than a lot of other grinders have. But if you're looking for that super high clarity grinder, you may want to look elsewhere. Now, apparently they're planning on releasing more burrs down the road. I don't know if or when that will happen. Personally, I would love to see a high clarity burr set. It's not my jam all the time, but it would be nice to have that option. Retention. How much grinds get stuck in here when you're grinding a cup of coffee? And I was really concerned about this in the beginning. This section in here where you have already ground coffee falling through down to another burr set, it just sounded like a retention nightmare to me. It's not quite as bad as I expected. However, what I will say is when you're grinding, if you finish grinding and then you weigh your dose, it'll sometimes be quite short, and then you have to shake it a couple times to make sure all the grounds actually get their way down into the lower burr. At that point, you can kind of get too close to a flat in out. I found I would get the best results with RDT. As long as I did that, it was not a huge issue, but still the fact that you have to shake it to get all the grounds down to that second burr, sometimes it's annoying. Also with this dechafer, it clogs. Not all the time, but sometimes I would grind, I would think I was finished, and I would look in here and there would be a ton of coffee just kind of sitting up here on this dechafer. Also, once you have this apart, this is super annoying, and it's kind of a bit of an oversight in my opinion. The grind size indicator is right here for the lower burr, and the actual grind size is here. So the issue is you can put this together several different ways after you take it apart, but the grind size won't have changed. So right now it's on 5.5. I know for a fact when I took this apart, it was on 0. So unless you're paying attention, you could really mess up your grind size. That is something that is apparently going to be remedied in an update on this grinder, but it's definitely a little annoying as it is. It's really big physically and really heavy at over 1 kilo. Grinding for espresso with a hand grinder, I saw somebody online somewhere say that's a lifestyle. And I think that's absolutely true in a lot of ways. Like, you feel like you're working when you're grinding for espresso on any hand grinder, this one included. When you're taking it apart to clean it, the number of parts, it's just a little intimidating, and you're going to be paranoid, especially the first couple times, that you're going to put it together wrong when you put it back together. And on that note, there are just so many adjustments that you can make on this grinder to get your brew to the heights that you want it to be at. And that's really fun to a point. I went through so much coffee trying to dial in different brews in different ways, trying to optimize the taste profile for what I was looking for. When I have a clear house and a little bit of time to play with my brews, that is a really enjoyable experience for me, but it's not all the time. Sometimes I just want that simple, brainless, predictable brew. And even if you do enjoy that all the time, you're always going to be left wondering, like, if I adjusted X, could it have been a little bit better? And you can spend a bunch of time chasing that perfect brew, and then before you know it, your bag of coffee is all gone. So that could be a positive or a negative depending on how you like to approach your coffee. And I think, like many of the things that I review on this channel, it depends on what you're looking for when you're trying to figure out if this is a good or bad fit for you. So I want to hear from you. Tell me, what do you think of the Momentem hand grinder? Most expensive hand grinder I've ever reviewed on this channel. Is that absolutely nuts? Is it overkill? Is it way too complicated? Or is that maybe exactly what you're looking for? Let me know in the comments. I hope your next cup of coffee is fantastic, and we'll see you next time.